Some of the most dangerous people in your life don't look dangerous at all. They smile, they comfort, they stand close enough to be called a friend, but somehow you feel smaller around them, less sure of yourself, less alive. You start to question your own thoughts. Your confidence fades, and worst of all, you blame yourself for it. That's how it works. The real threat isn't always the aggressive stranger or the loud manipulator. It's the familiar face that slowly alters the way you see yourself. Not through violence, but through influence. Not through force, but through invisible pressure. Carl Jung once warned that the psyche can be quietly shaped by others if you're not conscious of it. He believed some people serve as mirrors, but others as traps. They reflect back only what they want you to see, and they draw out your worst instincts while calling it love, loyalty, or duty. This video isn't just about protecting yourself from toxic people. It's about learning to identify the ones who damage you quietly, the ones who don't act like villains, but who still twist your mind into knots. Because if you don't recognize these dynamics, you'll keep repeating the same relationships, the same frustrations, the same emotional exhaustion, over and over again. We're going to explore 6 psychological profiles that Jung would consider dangerous, not because they're evil, but because they awaken the weakest parts of you. They trigger your insecurities, your guilt, your need to fix or please. And over time, they strip you of your identity without ever raising their voice. Each profile is based on patterns Jung observed in people who never integrated their shadow, the repressed, unconscious aspects of the personality. These are the people who live through projections, avoid growth, and feed off the energy of others to fill a void they refuse to face. And the most dangerous part? They often don't even realize they're doing it. Let's begin with the first of these hidden threats. Someone who doesn't overpower you, but over-relies on you. 1. The soft controller. He doesn't scream. He doesn't demand. In fact, he might seem like the gentlest person you know, but somehow you're always rearranging your life around his emotions. You feel responsible for his pain, his mood, his struggles. And if you ever try to step away, you're met with silence, withdrawal, or a subtle reminder of how much he needs you. This is the soft controller. He doesn't control you with power. He controls you with guilt, with emotional dependency, with stories of helplessness that make you feel like leaving him behind would be an act of cruelty. At first, he seems kind, vulnerable, safe. But over time, you notice the weight. You cancel plans to keep him calm. You avoid success because it might make him feel worse about himself. You become smaller so he can feel less insecure. And the scariest part? You start thinking this is compassion, but it's not. It's emotional manipulation wrapped in the language of love. Carl Jung believed that many people project their unresolved wounds onto others. The soft controller does exactly this. He turns you into the parent, the therapist, the savior he never had. And if you accept that role, you begin to live for his stability instead of your own freedom. You'll hear phrases like, "I don't know what I'd do without you. I'm just not strong like you are. You're the only one who understands me." They sound sweet, but they're loaded. They bind you, and they create a dynamic where saying no feels like betrayal. The soft controller isn't always malicious, but that's what makes him so dangerous. He often believes he truly loves you, that you're connected on a deep emotional level. And maybe you are, but if that connection only exists through your self-sacrifice, it's not love. It's codependency. The more you give, the more he needs. And the more he needs, the more he weakens your boundaries in the name of closeness. 2. The threatened underminer. Not all envy shows its teeth. Sometimes it smiles first. The threatened underminer is the kind of person who seems supportive on the surface. They clap when you succeed. They nod when you speak. They may even cheer you on in public. But underneath it all, something in them twists every time you rise. Every one of your accomplishments reminds them of what they're not doing, who they're not becoming. And instead of facing that pain, they quietly root for your failure. They won't say it out loud. They may not even consciously realize it. But their actions reveal the truth. They might accidentally forget to mention your achievement to others. They downplay your ideas. They offer backhanded compliments like, "You're doing great," for someone with your background. Or they raise subtle doubts. That's impressive, but are you sure you're ready for that kind of pressure? It all seems harmless, but over time their presence makes you question yourself. You start shrinking your dreams to avoid making them uncomfortable. You water down your voice, your style, your confidence, just to avoid being too much. Carl Jung would call this projection in its rawest form. The underminer is at war with their own potential, and instead of doing the inner work to grow, they cast their insecurities onto you. Your progress becomes a threat to their ego, and so they sabotage you, not with direct attacks, but with subtle erosion. You may catch them rolling their eyes when you talk about your goals, or offering advice that always leads you in circles. You may find yourself leaving conversations with them feeling smaller, foggier, and less motivated, without knowing why. They don't need to destroy your self-esteem in one blow. They just need to create doubt, a little hesitation, a little second-guessing, and if they do it well enough, you'll start holding yourself back, thinking it was your idea all along. One of the most painful truths about the threatened underminer is that they often start as close friends or even partners, people you trusted, people who once made you feel seen, and that's what makes their slow sabotage so hard to detect. You don't expect resistance from someone who once clapped the loudest. But here's the paradox: they still need you around. Not because they want you to succeed, but because they want proximity to your light without facing the effort it takes to create their own. They might even copy you, your style, your words, your ideas, but they'll do it with a quiet resentment, a bitterness they never say out loud. They want your power, but not your pain, your confidence, but not your scars. And deep down, they resent you for having what they don't. If this content makes sense to you, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Thank you. So how do you deal with them? First, stop expecting their validation. You don't need it. Second, watch their patterns, not their words. Someone who constantly shifts from admiration to dismissal isn't confused, they're conflicted. And third, protect your vision. You don't need to fight them, expose them, or fix them. You just need to stop shrinking for them. Your growth will always make some people uncomfortable. That's not your fault. It's their responsibility to face what your success triggers in them. And if they don't, they'll try to drag you back down. Not because they hate you, but because they hate what you represent. Proof that it's possible. Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." The threatened underminer would rather chip away at your ambition than confront their own stagnation. But their story isn't your prison. Let them feel threatened. Let them squirm in the presence of your strength. That discomfort isn't your burden. It's their invitation to change. Whether they accept it or not is up to them, but your only job is to keep rising. 3. The charming mirror. Some people don't control you by force. They control you by reflection. The charming mirror is the person who makes you feel deeply seen, but only as the version of you that they want to keep. They're magnetic, emotionally tuned. They always seem to say the right thing, anticipate your needs, echo your values. At first, it feels like you've found someone who truly gets you. Finally, someone who understands. But something deeper is happening. Something Jung would describe as a psychic trap. You're not being loved, you're being mirrored. They reflect your ideal self back at you so perfectly that you start depending on them for identity. Their approval becomes addictive. Their attention becomes your fuel. You stop asking yourself, "What do I want?" and instead wonder, "What would they admire?" And once that happens, you're no longer free. The charming mirror is not necessarily malicious. They may not even realize what they're doing, but they have an instinct for becoming exactly what you crave. And in doing so, they quietly train you to crave them back. It's a silent negotiation. I reflect the best version of you, so long as you don't outgrow the reflection. The moment you evolve, when your desires shift, your boundaries sharpen, your path diverges, they subtly resist. They become colder, distant, maybe disappointed. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you've stopped being easy to reflect. Suddenly, you're not who they thought you were, and that confusion cuts deep. You start questioning your transformation. You wonder if you're being ungrateful, selfish, too ambitious. But the truth is simpler. Your growth shattered the mirror. The charming mirror thrives when you stay consistent, predictable, and manageable. When you begin to outgrow their image of you, their hold starts to weaken. And that's when the subtle manipulations begin. Guilt, withdrawal, conditional affection, anything to bring you back to the version of yourself they knew how to handle. This is not love, it's containment. Jung warned us that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And that's exactly what the charming mirror fears you'll do, because once you see yourself clearly, you'll no longer need their reflection. So how do you break free? First, notice who you become around them. Do you feel empowered or edited? Do you shrink your truth to maintain harmony? If the only time you feel seen is when you stay the same, you're not being loved, you're being managed. Second, stop seeking their reaction. You don't need their applause to validate your evolution. Real connection survives change. It celebrates your becoming, even when it's inconvenient. And finally, reclaim your reflection. You are not a projection to be maintained. You are a whole being, messy, growing, shifting. And no one, no matter how charming, should hold the mirror so tightly that you forget your own face. Let them be puzzled. Let them grieve the version of you that stayed soft and still. Because the real you is no longer asking, "Do they still love me?" The real you is asking, "Do I still recognize myself in this connection?" When the answer becomes no, you know what to do. 4. The eternal victim. They always have a problem. Always. No matter the day, the mood, or the circumstance, the eternal victim carries a storm cloud above their head, and you are expected to stand in the rain with them. Their suffering becomes your responsibility. Their chaos, your burden, their helplessness, your job to fix. But here's what you eventually realize. Their pain is never about resolution. It's about control. At first, you feel sympathy, maybe even admiration. They've endured so much. They're sensitive, wounded, misunderstood. You want to help. You listen, you advise, you show up over and over again, but nothing changes. In fact, the more support you give, the worse they seem to get. Every time they fall, you're expected to catch them. And if you don't, you become the villain. You abandoned me. You don't care. After everything I've been through, you start walking on eggshells. Not because you fear their anger, but because you fear their collapse. This is how the eternal victim gains power, not by demanding it, but by dissolving in front of you until you hand it over. It's emotional blackmail hidden inside constant suffering. Carl Jung believed that victimhood becomes pathological when it's used to avoid responsibility. And that's the exact game being played here. By staying stuck in a narrative of helplessness, the eternal victim never has to evolve. They never have to face their shadow, their complicity, or their power. Because if they're always the one being hurt, they're never the one doing the hurting. This dynamic is especially dangerous for empathic people. You might think it's your duty to help them heal. But healing was never the goal. What they really want is attention, control, and a buffer from accountability. So how do you protect yourself? First, recognize the pattern. Real victims want solutions. Eternal victims want witnesses. Second, notice how you feel after being with them. Drained, guilty, confused. That's not compassion. That's emotional enmeshment, and the longer you stay entangled, the more you lose sight of your own needs. Third, set boundaries and hold them. You are not responsible for saving someone who refuses to swim. You are not cruel for stepping back when someone weaponizes their pain. Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." That includes living a life of never-ending tragedy, just to avoid the terrifying work of self-confrontation. You are not their therapist. You are not their crutch. You are a person with your own journey. And if someone's entire identity is built on being broken, then healing will always feel like betrayal to them. Let them go, not out of punishment but out of self-preservation. You are allowed to choose peace over crisis, growth over guilt, life over collapse. 5. The idealized idol. They walk into the room and suddenly, you feel small. Not because they've said anything, not because they've tried to belittle you, but because you've already placed them on a pedestal, high above your own worth. You don't question their opinions, you chase their approval. You silence your instincts just to be accepted by them. This is the idealized idol. They become your compass, your mirror, your measure of success. Everything you are is filtered through the lens of who they are, or who you think they are. And without even realizing it, you start abandoning yourself piece by piece in exchange for their validation. But here's the truth. They never asked for this power. You gave it to them. Carl Jung believed that when we haven't fully developed our own identity, we project authority and meaning onto others. Instead of cultivating inner direction, we outsource our sense of self. We attach our worth to someone else's light, hoping it will reflect back on us. And at first, it feels good. Idolizing someone makes life simpler. You don't have to think as much. You just follow. You echo their beliefs. You mimic their behavior. You feel protected, guided. But over time, the price becomes unbearable. You start to censor your opinions. You minimize your needs. You tolerate disrespect. Why? Because disagreement feels like betrayal. Because asserting yourself feels like rebellion. Because their presence has become your identity, and challenging them threatens your illusion of safety. Eventually, you either lose yourself completely, or you break the spell. And breaking the spell is brutal. You begin to see their flaws. You notice their contradictions. You realize they're not perfect. They're human. And that realization isn't just disappointing, it's disorienting. Because if they're not who you thought they were, who are you without them? But here's the gift. Disillusionment is freedom. When you stop worshiping someone else, you make space to honor yourself. You reclaim your voice. You reconnect with your intuition. You stop filtering your worth through someone else's gaze. And that's when you begin to lead your own life. You were never meant to follow forever. Leaders aren't born from mimicry. They're forged in self-trust. The more you idolize someone, the less you'll ever believe you're capable of becoming like them. That's the trap. The very thing that inspires you becomes the thing that limits you. So how do you escape? You recognize that admiration without boundaries becomes self-erasure. You understand that no matter how wise or powerful someone seems, they are not above you. They are not the truth. You are. And you accept that real growth begins when the pedestal breaks, and you meet your idols not as gods, but as mirrors. Some will reflect back your potential. Others, your fears. But none of them define you. Stop chasing the light in others. Start becoming it. 6. The smiling manipulator. They never yell. They never insult. They never make a scene. In fact, they seem gentle, thoughtful, empathetic. They check in on you. They remember the little things. They smile often. You'd never suspect them because everything they do feels nice. But that's the trick. This is the smiling manipulator, and their greatest weapon is subtlety. They don't force, they suggest. They don't demand, they guilt. They don't punish. They withdraw just enough to make you chase after their approval again. And before you know it, you're doing things you never wanted to do, saying yes when you meant no, sacrificing your peace to protect their feelings. Because deep down, you don't want to disappoint them. They've trained you for that. You see, the smiling manipulator doesn't use fear, they use affection. They make you feel like you're chosen, like you're seen in a way no one else sees you. They'll say things like, "You're the only one I can count on," or "No one else understands me like you do." And those words feel flattering until they become chains. Suddenly, any act of independence from you feels like betrayal to them. Any boundary you set feels cold. Any desire that doesn't serve them becomes selfish. And if you bring it up, if you try to explain how their presence is suffocating you, they'll tilt their head and say, "I was only trying to help." Now you're the problem. You're being ungrateful, you're misinterpreting things, and you begin to doubt yourself. That's how it works. They don't attack your defenses, they rewrite them. They don't shatter your self-esteem, they slowly reshape it until it conforms to their needs. Carl Jung warned us that one of the most dangerous things a person can do is to unconsciously project their shadow onto others, forcing them to carry the weight of traits they refuse to own. The smiling manipulator does this with charm. They suppress their need for control under layers of kindness and make you feel guilty for wanting autonomy. But here's how you know you're in their web. You start second-guessing your emotions. You find yourself explaining basic boundaries. You feel exhausted after conversations. And worst of all, you can't even name what's wrong because nothing seems wrong on the surface. It's emotional fog, and the only way to break through it is clarity. You must name what they're doing, not for them, but for you. You must remind yourself. Manipulation doesn't require malice. It just requires your silence. You don't owe endless understanding to someone who weaponizes your empathy. You don't need to stay in relationships that feel emotionally draining just because they look peaceful on the outside. Kindness without respect is still control. So take the smile at face value, but trust the patterns. If their presence consistently leads to confusion, guilt, or self-doubt, something deeper is at play. And the most loving thing you can do for both of you is step away. Because when you stop rewarding manipulation disguised as care, you create space for something real, honest, clean, respectful connection. The kind that doesn't rely on emotional tricks, guilt, or invisible strings. You're not here to play a role in someone else's fantasy. You're here to live your truth. 7. The eternal victim. No matter what happens, it's never their fault. They were mistreated, misunderstood, let down again, and again, and again. Every bad outcome in their life can be traced back to someone else. An unfair boss, a toxic parent, an ex who ruined them. A world that's just too cruel to cope with. Meet the eternal victim. The person whose entire identity is built around being wronged. And at first, it makes you want to help. You listen, you empathize, you try to give advice, you hold space for their pain, because that's what kind people do. But you'll notice something. Nothing changes. They don't take your advice. They don't reflect. They don't take steps forward. In fact, if you suggest any kind of responsibility, they'll flinch like you just stabbed them. Because their pain isn't something they're trying to heal. It's something they've fused with. It gives them meaning, attention, protection from effort, from risk, from accountability. If they let go of the victim identity, they'd have to face their own power, and they're terrified of it. Carl Jung would say they've disowned their animus, their inner strength, their drive, their masculine force. And in doing so, they've become hollow. passively waiting for someone else to fix their lives, then resenting them when they try. And this is where the danger lies. The eternal victim won't just stay stuck, they'll drag you with them. Slowly, gently, emotionally, they'll start leaning on you for every decision, every ounce of motivation, every little rescue mission. And at first, it feels good to be needed, but soon you'll feel drained. You'll notice how your energy is always pouring into them, but nothing ever fills back. And if you try to pull away, even just a little, they'll respond with guilt, sadness, or stories of how everyone always abandons them. You become their new villain, just like all the others. And here's the hardest truth to swallow: you cannot save them. Because they don't want to be saved, they want to be confirmed. They want you to mirror back the story they've been telling themselves for years, that they're powerless, unlucky, cursed. But you can't heal someone by agreeing with their limitations. You can only support people who are willing to rise. And the eternal victim isn't ready, not yet. So what do? You stop overfunctioning. You let them carry their weight. You resist the urge to explain or convince. And most importantly, you realize this: compassion doesn't mean captivity. You can love someone and still leave. You can care without fixing. You can witness their pain without sacrificing your own peace to it. Remember what Jung taught: to grow, you must confront your own shadow, not outsource it, not project it, not bury it behind stories. True transformation begins when someone chooses to face themselves. Until then, they'll cling to the only identity they know, the one where they're always the victim, and you are just another disappointment. Don't become that. Don't shrink for them. Don't drown trying to save someone who won't swim. Walk away, not with anger, but with clarity. You were never meant to be their hero. You were meant to be your own. You don't become who you are by accident. Every interaction shapes you. Every dynamic carves something into your mind, your self-worth, your habits, your fears. The people closest to you either sharpen your clarity or blur your boundaries. They either push you toward your highest self or keep you tethered to your weakest patterns. That's why it matters who you keep around. It's not about judgment, it's about survival. About protecting the part of you that's still becoming, still learning to stand on its own, without guilt, without fear, without the weight of everyone else's needs on your shoulders. Carl Jung believed that most people live in reaction to others. They don't live from the self. They live from fear, from approval, from projections. And the more unaware you are, the more easily you become a mirror for someone else's shadow. But now you see it. The soft controller, the threatened underminer, the emotional puppeteer, the smiling competitor, the drainer, the eternal victim. They were never just personalities. They were forces, each one pulling at your psyche, hoping you wouldn't notice. But you did. And once you name the pattern, it loses its grip. Once you see the mechanism, you can step outside of it. The real work begins now, not in avoiding people, but in strengthening your awareness. In asking, who am I around this person? Do I shrink or do I expand? Do I feel seen or just used? Your life is shaped by the energies you allow to orbit you. Choose wisely, because peace isn't passive, it's protected. And your growth depends on it.